We have gotten accustomed to a kind of language about talking about our work and our children and our schools that keeps getting more and more scary to me, even as we've also adopted, co-opted some of the language that you and I are most comfortable with. You know, I look back at an article I wrote for the New York Times promoting small schools in the late 1970s, and I thought, I actually still agree with that, but every time I hear about another school in America, which is every day, system that has turned a big school into small schools, I actually wince. Yep. And the same with terms like collaboration. When we first started working together in New York in the early 70s, we formed an organization called the Center for Collaborative Education. And it was some time before I realized that I was against collaboration. And I was for resistance. Now at the time I thought, it was collaborating with me. They would. And then I realized the tide was going the other direction. It wasn't me who was having any real voice in how that water was churning. And so I'm now for the Center for Resistance. But now I did grow up in World War II when the word collaboration had a very bad name, and in the labor movement where collaboration had a bad name. So I don't exactly know when the period of history was in which people like us thought it was going to turn into a good word. But anyway, I started off as an early childhood teacher, and we have drifted a long way from what kindergarten looked like. I used to be able to say I was a kindergarten teacher, and my whole idea was to take kindergarten through 12th grade. And now I have to admit to you, no. Go look at those kindergartens. They look like 12th grades, or worse, because in 12th grade they could at least move around from one class to the other. When my own children heard that I was for block schedules and all these kinds of things, they said, "Oh, I hope you don't try to introduce that into our schools." I said, "Why?" They said, "Because the only thing wonderful about school is that every 40 minutes you get a break, you can see your friends, and some other, no teacher can be totally boring in only 40 minutes, but give them an hour and a half." I went to a coalition elementary school recently, and I think the woman who's coaching them is doing wonderful things. But their kindergarten, their pre-kindergarten and kindergarten do not have blocks, sand, water, plants, animals, or clay, or paint. I can't remember anything else that was. They do have books, but not even those pretty beautiful. They have reading books, not beautiful collections of picture books. There's nothing that was in my old kindergarten that has. It used to be, there was a period I used to go subbing in Chicago when I'd see beautiful kindergartens, and it's true, they often weren't used, those blocks. The teacher would say, if you're very good at the end, we'll play with the blocks and the paints. But at least they were there. Children could dream about them. Now they can't. So, my friend Ayla, there she is. I got out of the school at a time, and it may still be that way, when we had figured out how to sort of stay true, we thought, and I don't know how much we drifted. I think we did drift, but we pretty much stayed true to what we believed in, and figured out how to survive within the system. But as I go around, I find it harder, and more people I know who've been fired, or removed. It's harder for a lot of schools in New York to have a base even, someplace where you felt will protect you. It's hard to have connections. I depended a lot on godfathers, people in key places who might come to my aid. But the system, at least in New York, and I think some of the same thing is true in Chicago, the mayors have bought up all the space. There's they've got everybody under their tent. And I worked for NYU. NYU's under their tent. NYU couldn't exist if Bloomberg and the mayor's friends didn't continue to support it. Their education department, for sure. And it just sucked all the places. And so when there's still oppositions, but it's harder, and it's harder for me to simply say what I used to say, wait till they threaten to fire you. That was my answer to anybody who complained and whined about it. They said. I'd say, you have to be accountable to yourselves and responsible for the kids in front of you and their families. And when they actually are about to put in the papers to fire you, then you have to look around and decide how you're going to respond. But don't give in before they even threaten you. But I'm more uncomfortable saying that to my colleagues these days. I would like to, but partly I'm not in their shoes anymore. And partly because we've all lived through a few experiences where some of whom are sitting in this, at least one of whom is sitting in this room, where there was no warning, there was no, they suddenly disappeared. And there was no, we didn't know how to make a fight. But I feel like, and part of me feels like saying to you, there's no business our staying in this business if we can't find the cracks in the system where we can be genuine, authentic people standing for what we believe in. And that it's true they're monitoring more closely. But I go back to Lillian Weber's hope, and Ella reminded me that it's still possible, at least in Boston, she said there are always cracks, there are always places, there are always ways to hide, and when they get you, there's always tomorrow to go back to doing it again. When someone would say they made me to take this out of the room, and she'd say, well, so take it out of the room, and next week you put it in the room. And they just went to Alyce School recently and tore all the artwork off the walls. And in the classrooms, because there's some fire rule that says only 20% of the walls.
Yeah.
Whoever's filming this don't. And 20% of the walls. And so we had a theory that 80% of the walls should be covered with wonderful artwork. Anyway, but Ella assures me not to worry, it's coming back.
We are.
So that's what we have to figure out, how to rebound, how to have. It's not a question even of courage. I said one more story. My 10 minutes probably up. But one more story. My son's in the room here, and he came back from hitchhiking when he was about 17 years old. He had hitchhiked across the country and so forth and so on. And he came back, and my daughter and I are sitting there in the living room waiting for him to come downstairs because we're going to go out to a movie or something. And we're saying how courageous he is. Imagine, he didn't know where he'd sleep at night, and he's going on and on of this sort. And he comes down, we said, Nick, would you call the Thalia and find out what's playing there tonight? And he walks over the phone and he says, it makes me so nervous to make phone calls like this. What do the rest of you call? And I thought, if we unite our courage. Those who are courageous about driving around the country, and those who are courageous about making phone calls. Mine is buying shoes. It's very hard to go to the store and say I wanted a size 11 shoe. And so we all find what somebody else can do easily courageous. And I don't think I remember any, or certainly not many times in my life, when I did something that was really courageous for me. But I depended on other people having courage in the areas I didn't. So that's what makes a movement. Somehow or other we all fit into something bigger than any one of us. And this North Dakota Study Group is one of the places every year that keeps me sure that this thing is going to go on, and then it's going to start slower, and then it's going to reverse direction and pick up speed. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. I'm Alyce Barr, and I'm the principal of the Brooklyn School for Collaborative Studies. And it's really funny because this morning I was actually thinking about that word collaboration in terms of World War II, so I guess we were having some little telepathic moment there. But way back when we were trying to name the school, theme schools are very popular in New York, and I am not a believer in theme schools, so I thought, well, wouldn't it be great to have a school where the main theme was teaching people how to work together in some positive way. So there you go. Long name. I'm sort of in awe of the situation I find myself in. You know these forestas, and they put you behind tables, and you have your hand raised when you're not raising it, and so here I am sitting next to someone who I have seen as a long-distance and short-distance mentor for my whole career in New York City education, and I'm very, very honored to be here. So since most of you don't know me, and though I'm also honored to be here with people whose children I've taught, and people who have been my colleagues, and my lifelong partner who's been a teacher for 25 years, more than 25 years, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, because my story is what makes me the person I am who does the job I do. So really, I'm a person who grew up in a very small town with 800 people. I was laughing when Sid earlier said a small town with 35,000 people. To me, that would have been a very large city. And I lived there until I was 16 years old, and I went to a school. My first grade teacher was my mother in my hometown, but then I went to a junior senior high school that pulled from 4 towns. And so I am not from a place where there are things like school choice. This is where you go to school. And I lived then in Providence, Rhode Island from the time I was 16 till I was 23. And shortening the story very quickly, I did a year in a school called the Alternate Learning Project, which was an alternative high school in Providence that was born in the 1970s. And somebody's in here from there?
Barbara Cervone. I helped start the school in 1971.
So when I was I came out of this high school in the country in Sullivan County where there had been about 20% African Americans, and most of them worked in the hotel industry, which is now dead in that area. And our school was very tracked, and I only at most had 1 or 2 black kids in my class. And we had a very, very good basketball team that had lots of great black ball players on it. And my first stand up to power was saying to my neighbor, who was the coach and the school dean, that the school was not providing an education for those kids. And he didn't speak to me pretty much for the rest of the time I lived in the town. So I moved to Providence. I went to what was supposed to be this alternative school, and my first thoughts about it were that it was great because we had spool tables and beanbag chairs and opportunities to go to colleges. And all of a sudden I realized that the outcomes were not necessarily so different for our kids along socioeconomic lines than they really were in my school, and it tore me apart. And so I have been driven by the idea that outcomes are a piece of what we have to look at when we evaluate ourselves as teachers or as school leaders or as people who send our children to school. So what else informs me is that I'm my lens. I'm a mother. I have 3 children. They're 21, 24, and almost 29. And I've always thought, I started out teaching like my mother taught me. I taught my oldest daughter as an early childhood teacher. And I thought, this school, any school I work in, has to be good enough for my children. I thought I'd never be a teacher, actually. I was appalled that I was sure I was going to stay in art and work in art, and I didn't want my mother's job. I didn't want to work with people. My exposure to teachers was that they were always complaining about children. They weren't like my mother. They always said horrible things about kids. And I wanted to work outside as a parent with schools. And then I look at Mariana, and there was the Brooklyn New School. There's some of you who probably know about that school, modeled after Debbie's School, Central Park East. And I came in first as a parent when it was opening, and second year got a job in that school and worked there in Brooklyn New School as a teacher and then as a co-director. And then from that launching pad was the founding principal of the school I now lead, which shares the building with Brooklyn New School. So My school opened in 2001, which was a rather inauspicious year to be opening anything in New York City. And it started with 100 sixth graders, and it grew one grade at a time. So now we go up to grade 11, and we'll stop growing after next year because I don't have plans to add a college. I want to, from my story, my very large contextual story, I want to hone in on 2 recent days. So I guess 2 things I could say about myself in relation to that is that I've always been an outspoken person. I think part of it is the parents I grew up with. My father, if he were alive now, would be over 100, but he was an IWW organizer and a Spanish Civil War veteran, and he was a big talker, and my mother certainly stood up for the things that she believed in education. I just recently interviewed her in StoryCorps and have an amazing tape of her talking about teaching in a one-room schoolhouse, and it's pretty incredible. So talking up and saying what's on my mind has not been a hard thing for me over the years. So I'm going to tell the other side of my story of a silence that has recently come over me, and its genesis. So many of you have heard that in New York City we've recently experienced some across-the-board budget cuts of 1.75%, and in my particular school that would be in the $70,000 range. We principals in New York City do our budgets in a web-based budgeting system that is familiar to this wonderful woman over here who's a school business manager in a different school. But so we go online, and it's like a declining balance spreadsheet. You have to attach money to funding, to things you're going to spend it for. That's called scheduling money. And so losing $70-something thousand, that sounds pretty bad, except that when you start out at the beginning of the year, they give you all your money. It goes into that My Galaxy program, and you have to commit it to various things. You pay each teacher, you put it in little places where you can spend it on computers, on books, on furniture, on after-school programs, whatever you're going to spend it on. Well, for 3 years running, and through no mistake of mine, and everyone outside the school says this, someone has made a mistake in the amount of money that was given to my school. One year it was $80-something thousand, one year it was $100-something thousand, and this year it was over $400,000.
You're talking extra, right?
Extra.
Yeah.
You
But
got
in
more.
visit, yes. So principals are told that they should schedule and spend their money as quickly as possible. It's that it's irresponsible to leave money waiting around, that you should know what you're doing with it, and you should figure out what to do. So keep that in the back of your mind when I tell you my story. The story starts on January 30th, and it's a regular day, which there are no regular days. But I started out the morning at Teachers College, Columbia Teachers College, where Walter Dean Myers was speaking, and he did a wonderful presentation in which he took us through how he writes a particular book. And the book he used was Game, and he talked a lot about his work with foster kids and with interviewing kids, and how he creates a context for a book, and how he lives in a neighborhood and takes photographs and pins them up on the walls, and how he is trying to set up his character to go through the same kinds of internal challenges that kids I know face. And I'm at the edge of my seat thinking I have to talk to him about this because I know he comes to schools. And I'm a passionate reader of YA fiction, and the best thing I can do every day is put a book that I know is right in the hands of a kid who I know will read it. So I go up, I talk to him, he likes me enough to give me the book, which I'm very moved by, and I move through my day. And the next part of it is some workshop at Teachers College about how the kids did or didn't do on the tests, and I get through that. And then I head downtown to the Food Network, where I'm meeting 6 students and a teacher, so we can walk through the Food Network. Because another thing I really believe in is that you should get people who don't know kids to know kids, and get kids to know people who wouldn't otherwise know them. And that's something I have read about a lot in books of yours, and how it was interesting just walking around there and people would say, "Oh, look, kids," as if they were, Martians from another, or some exotic species. But seeing, breaking down the context of kids being in a place where there are 600 of them and 70 adults. So we had a great visit. The kids had a fancy thing demystified for them, and they were very high on the experience of being in a place that's secret and magical for them. And I left, and looming in the back of my head has been some rumors that there's something wrong with your budget and you should get all your money scheduled. So even though it's 5 o'clock, I rush back to school, and I sit down and I get every bit of that money into some place where it can be spent. So it's now all attached to something. So I'm going to be able to at least pay the people who have been working in the school under contracts, not teachers, they're already taken care of, and buy the things that we need, et cetera, et cetera. I finish, I go home, and I'm one of those people on those horrible little BlackBerry devices, and an hour and a half later, and I couldn't make up this name if I tried, I get an email, and you got it too, from a woman named Kathleen Grimm. It would be great, wouldn't this be so good if I were writing a short story, I'd get A+, but then they'd probably tell me that, you know, too much symbolism, calm it down a little. So Kathleen Grimm tells us that we've all had our budgets cut by 1.75%. And I think that sucks, but I'm still wondering about these rumors that something's really wrong with my budget, and I didn't have that number yet. So I'm flabbergasted. Every single person I knew everywhere, no one knew. The highest budget people I knew swore to me, and I have no reason not to believe that they didn't know. And I'm thinking, who is it working in they wrote us in this email that they had all been looking into our budgets and they knew what money we might have not to spend. And I thought, who works in these offices? Where are those collaborators who sit behind desks and don't leak this, and sit looking into school budgets and don't take it away? So I call up somebody I know who knows many Times education writers, and I say, give me the email address of all these Times education writers, because I can't believe this. At the same time, I finally do get the news about my budget, and it's not 1.75%, it's this $322,000. Earlier in the year, I had been told that we were over allocated, and they told me to do something which is set aside money, $118,000, and then another $17,000, and I did that. And that money was taken, and I expected it to go. So we're talking about $322,000 on top of that. There's no $322,000 left in February. This is like 5 teachers. And reorganize the classes into like classes of 35. But who would be doing this? Because every kid is hand programmed and they have their own schedule. So we've paid for people to come to places like this and to do national professional development through expeditionary learning outward bound. We paid for that already, but how would they get there? Because it would be the plane ticket money. So are they going to walk to California? Are they going to drive to Chicago? It's things like that. It's like after-school programs that people were begging for or already running, ending right then. So I write a letter to all the business people and say, sorry, I have nothing from this budget I can cut. And furthermore, if you don't call me the principal. If you want me to do it, you come in and do it. I'm not attached to the budget. And I'm not coming to any meeting that you have unless the chancellor comes. I've had it. You made the mistake, bring it on. But then, I have many colleagues who are very upset about their 1.75%. And they're out on the street, and they're organizing their parents, and they're organizing their kids. And I'm looking at $322,000, and I'm saying to myself, if I can't make a backdoor deal on this, I will seriously impede the progress of this school. I will stop people from having a job. I will stop kids from learning because it will create tremendous chaos. And I silenced myself. And every day when people organize for protest around this, I'm not one of those people. And I did call all those godmothers and godfathers and every person I knew behind closed doors, and I said, come here and help me with this. Because there's nothing for me to do here without your help. And it's hard because it's not my nature. And then I said, and if you do it, and if you really take the $322,000, I want you to know I'm sitting on every New York Times education writer's email address, and I will go down with it. So don't come and take that money. They bought my silence. I'm clear on it. I'm there with it. I understand exactly what I'm doing, and it's hard. It's very, very, very hard. So that's January 30th. I want to take you fast forward to February 4th. February, in the middle of all this, we have the famous British people marching around New York City trying to decide whether or not we have enough dust on our shelves or the right kind of dust. And I already experienced a hellish nightmare with that last year, so I'm told 2.5 weeks before that it's time for our school quality review, and I better get myself ready for that. So I'm in the process of losing $322,000 and trying to make sure that we don't wind up with another disastrous problem with the school quality review.
Can you just say a little bit about, because I think some people might not know.
So we have external school quality review. The city had plenty of money for this. They contracted Cambridge Education from England to come in and decide how well we're doing, even though they do or don't know anything about how schools are run in New York, or what even our challenges might be under NCLB or anything else like that. So be it. And the only measurement for us is how we use data. And even the people from Cambridge don't particularly like the rating scale that New York has come up with, but they have they can only work with the rating scale in front of them because that's what they're contracted to do with our tax dollars. So on February 4th, I'm spending the day preparing for what's going to happen on February 11th and 12th, which is this quality review, and we're getting ready. We're having a staff meeting in which we're trying to give the staff the final idea. You know, we have 20 new teachers this year. What is a quality review? What's going to happen? Where do you have to be? How do you prepare? What are they going to ask us, etc. And back to the BlackBerry, while I'm in the middle of this, I get an email from my chancellor, and he asked me, would I like a new job to become an executive principal, and I can have a $25,000 raise for the next 3 years if I would just leave the school I'm in and go run any school he wants me to, which will be a failing, disastrous school, and fix it. Because that's what I think. I could just walk in somewhere where nobody knows me and fix it, and that would just make things right. So I thought, isn't this ironic? If they took the $75,000, that would be $75,000 right out of the $322. I could put it right back in this school. But I think maybe today is not the day to answer the chancellor about this exact great new job offer. So I'll just hold off on that until I get through these other things. And that's 2 days in the life of a New York City principal.
I wanted to focus in on one particular thing that we've done recently. It's always good to focus on the positive, and we just filed a lawsuit against Chicago Public Schools, and we're real happy about that. Always a good day. We filed a lawsuit because when high schools were broken up into small schools back several years ago, the Chicago Public Schools decided that they didn't need an elected local school council anymore, although that is written into the law. But there is an exemption in the law which says that in a small school, you don't need to have an elected local school council. You can have an advisory board. And of course, we love advisory boards because we can appoint them, and then if we don't like them, we can get a different board. So, however, there's an exemption to the exemption in the law, which says that if there was an LSC in that building, you still have to have a real LSC. And our wonderful public school system, which cannot read the law to comprehend it, ignored that and went ahead and just dismantled all these local school councils. So our lawsuit basically is on behalf of some of those schools where the LSCs had been real, had been elected, had a parent majority, and are now appointed and advisory. And one of those schools...
Just to point out, the LSC has real power. They hire the principal. This is not...
The local school council has real power. It hires and fires the principal. That's major. That's the key linchpin of the authority that they have. However, they also do approve the school budget, and we have about an average of about $500,000 of discretionary funds that the local school council controls, and also the school improvement plan. It's really the principal, though, that has become the real issue, because who's your boss? You know, if you're answering to your local school council, it's very different than if you're answering to the central office. And the effort has been to make sure that the principals feel that they're accountable to the central office and not to their elected community body. One of the school's plaintiffs in our case is actually from what used to be the Orr High School, a large school that was broken up into small schools, and most recently, and fairly well known, is now going to be reconsolidated back into a big high school. because we didn't know what we were doing the first time, so let's try something else. And they're not very happy about that, but we also believe that one of the reasons they're doing it is because the current advisory board, which is a plaintiff in our case, would no longer exist once that school is, the small school is closed and reconsolidated. So it's a little legal maneuver that we think that they're trying to pull. And the reason I wanted to bring this case up is that so many of the things that happen that we work on at Pure are related to the overall overarching issues that are happening around the country. So I wanted to just, the page 2 of the handout that was inside the folder, I just want to raise some of those issues. One is that the system basically uses its own analysis of test scores to say that this is good, this is bad, you're a failing school so I can close you, but this is our new model turnaround school, which is going to be then forced on other schools because we think it's so good. And in actuality, there's very little difference in the outcomes on test scores of those different types of schools. Also, they claim that they want to be collaborative, they want to listen. They have hearings, but they have hearings where nobody listens. They have to have a hearing before they close a school, but when you go to the hearing, there's no one there who has any authority at all. There's a person taking notes, and there's a hearing officer who gets all of his jobs from Chicago Public Schools, so he's never yet turned in a report that's different from the outcome that was already proposed. So we have the, so people do go. I mean, if you're having a hearing on closing your own school, if you don't show up, then what they'll say is, well, nobody cares about your school. So 75 people will show up, and they'll all talk and say what they want to say, and it really doesn't matter at all. It doesn't make any difference. And that's very demoralizing to everybody. Some of the new schools that have been created under Renaissance 2010, some of them, not all of them, have some significant advantages over the traditional schools. So for example, overall these schools don't serve as many low-income children, as many bilingual children, or as many special education children, and that's just the facts. And yet that's never factored into why they may be doing slightly better, or why some might be doing better than their, as CPS likes to compare them to schools that, we don't know how they're making this comparison, but their new schools are always better than the comparison schools. And also many of the new schools have resources that the traditional schools can't afford, like extra people in the classroom. The new turnaround model actually has 3 adults in every classroom, and wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't that be nice?
They get a lot of support from the foundation community. That's a lot of where our funding went. And they also may have, less expensive teachers, of course, who then will work from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. for 2 years, and then they go someplace else and get a different kind of job. And one of the things that they're talking about is that it's our, well, there's a lot of rhetoric, the moral obligation, and everything that they're doing is going to be dramatically better, and that one of our major goals is to give parents a choice. Parents really should have a choice, and it offends them deeply when I tell them, parents we talk to don't want a choice. Parents want the school in their neighborhood to be a good school. And, why don't you focus on that? And then you can worry about choice later. And they don't like that because they think that they're supposed to provide parental choice. And then finally, basically, so much of this is generated out of a public relations office. And there's really no substance to it. When we get called to meetings, I get called to a meeting, and many of my colleagues, where ostensibly they're going to explain to us their latest atrocity and get our feedback, which of course they don't care about because they're not going to change. But I figured out eventually what they're doing is, when they do that, what they're doing is trotting out their PR story. They want to see how we react, and then before they go public with it, they go out and reorient it so that it can answer all the challenges that we raised, which it doesn't. But it's really just opposition research. And so, it's so, and they're so good at it. They have people who spend, all of their time on staff doing that kind of work. So that's the situation that we're in, and I know some of the same things are going on. I just want to share what I've tried to bring today is to share some of the strategies that we've used. And yes, parents can say and do things that people who are hired by the system can't do. Parents do have a lot of challenges as well. I know parents every day talk to us about their children being intimidated and threatened, and there being problems at the school because of things that they've said. One thing I pointed out to people who go to testify at the Board of Education meetings is that when you go to sign up, immediately after this, that you sign up, the Board of Education staff takes that list and they go and they call every principal who has a parent or any other person listed on that list and says, what's this, so-and-so is coming down here to testify, what are they here to talk about? And often the principal will have to come down and be there to perhaps provide a response or to get in the face of the person who's testifying. So it's a whole process that they've got to try to intimidate parents. So some of the strategies we use are legal. We're very fortunate that we have a good longtime friend who's a board member, who's very committed to this work, who does some of our work pro bono. And because we've tried to get major law firms in the city to take on some of this work, and none of them will touch it. So she's able to do some minor, things, and like this lawsuit that we just did. She also helped us back in 1999. We filed a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights against the high-stakes testing use of the Iowa test in Chicago, and we're pretty successful with that. But she's been very, a key part of our work, and it's something that developed through a relationship and finding somebody who was really committed to the work and was willing to put that time in. But we've also worked with some of the groups like MALDEF, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and some others. So there are possibilities of ways you can get some legal help. We do use the media. We use the media to put pressure on the mayor, to put pressure on the school system. And there are lots of ways of doing that. We like to put a press conference on when we have a reason for it. So, for example, when we just filed our lawsuit, we had a press conference and got some pretty good coverage. Also, we write editorials, try to get those out there, and then I just started a blog. So you gotta do it, but it's kind of fun, and it's not too different from just having those thoughts go through your head, not having anybody to talk to about it. One thing that Pure has done, and I think it's been a real contribution, is that we write up little fact sheets. Because part of what we do is we try to translate the information, policy information, education issues, into language that parents can understand. It's not that parents can't get it, it's just that it's often in jargon, and so it's not easy to understand. So that's just something that we do, and there's an example of a couple of those in this packet. So for example, for our press conference, we did a little thing here that shows the difference between a regular LSC and an advisory LSC. People don't always understand what the difference is. Another thing about an advisory local school council is that if they have a code of conduct built into their policy, and that means if the Board of Education decides that you're disrupting the school, they can remove you even from the advisory council. So there's all these layers of pressure that makes this board completely useless that doesn't exist in a regular local school council. We're also trying to promote the kind of information that we want people to understand, and one is that local school councils provide a kind of community buy-in and community involvement that actually contributes towards school improvement. And there's a lot of research about that, so we continually try to put that out there. Because I think the major frustration that we have is that policymaking in Chicago is never about children, and it's never about education. And it tends to be about real estate for the most part, but also it's about the same kinds of sell points that we hear from President Bush on down about why we need to do things. And the whole issue about the Orr High School, where it was broken up into small schools and now going to be reconsolidated, is that there's no learning process at all in that. Why didn't it work? What are we trying to do now that we didn't do before? There's never any of that. It's somehow if you can just repackage it and relabel it, then it's okay. And So one thing we're trying to do is just continually bring research and talk about analysis, and, you know, so that maybe at some point they'll catch on. And I guess, you know, that's, I just really wanted to share some of that, some of the materials and things that we use in Chicago. We are a small, very small group right now. We're down to 2 staff members, and we do have a significant membership. Both teachers and parents. Our organization was founded by teachers and parents together. And one thing that we have always stood for is that it's not about, you can't ever pit us against teachers. This is never going to happen. And we're always there saying, you know, the real problem is out there. It's those folks with power that need to be told what's going on. We need to stand together with the teachers. And we need to speak out in times when teachers can't speak out, because if we don't do it, who will? Thanks a lot.
We're all suffering under these high-stakes tests in all of our schools. And in our progressive schools in New York, we have worked and struggled very hard to look at children's strengths as opposed to what the high-stakes tests show us, which is their weaknesses. So if you could speak a little bit about what you are doing in your schools, or what you think needs to happen to change the equation so that as educators we can start to talk about really good ways to assess children so that we can help them grow from what we know is their gifts and talents.
So it seems to me there are a series of questions out here that have to do with how we can respond to the spin, which relates to the question of, is this a new phenomenon? What keeps us going? And how do we get our message about other ways in which we can more appropriately be held accountable, responsible for our work? And you know, several things I just want to throw out quickly. One is to keep remembering that democracy was invented as a form of accountability. I mean, it's that's what it's all about, holding someone accountable for their work. And but it's in the name of accountability that they are removing the connection between people, the people at the bottom, and decisions making. And I thought that was interesting, that somehow small schools, they shouldn't have elected parents. And I think, why? I mean, what is it about a big school in which they should elect them, and a small school in which they should be appointed? So, you know, but it's good to go back to what are the assumptions underlying the democratic idea. And if you recall Miles Horton's words this morning that were presented, that I don't have them right down here properly, but it has, in a way, of thinking about the people we represent when we lead a school, the kids, parents, and staff that we represent, and our view of them as whom we're responsible to. And that is the connection which I think all of these deform, I like to call them, movements have forgotten, that the connection between leadership and the membership is that's whom you're accountable to. And I remember once saying to my daughter coming home from school said to me that the teacher told her that when the kids were out of the room, when she went out of the room, she was supposed to notice who was misbehaving and put it up there. And I said, whose rules were you supposed to be? What rules? Did the class discuss the rules? Were you representing the class or the teacher? And she said, the teacher. And I said, well, then the teacher has to be accountable for the rules that she set, and you students can be accountable for the rules that they set. So anyway, but it's that connection, that when the point comes as the leader of a school that you cannot keep your eye on the parents and kids and teachers, but are always looking over your shoulder to see what they're up to, then we're not leaders of our schools. And that same thing is true for every classroom teacher. When the classroom teacher is spending most of her time looking over her shoulder for what the principal's going to do, or the coach, or the whoever is there, and not worrying about the children in front of her and their parents, then, so that's the point at which there's no point in you being, I mean, that is my bottom line. And as long as you keep that bottom line, you can be hopeful, because there is something you can do. I mean, and there's no classroom that it's that sense of powerfulness you have as a teacher or as a principal, which is just what you answered me yesterday, Ella, looking at her. It's that sense that there is something I can do tomorrow that will be better for those kids and those staff and those parents, and that you have that as a classroom teacher, as a parent. Now, when they have cut your arms off and your legs off, and you cannot protect the people that you're responsible to, then quitting and joining Pure is the thing to do. I mean, there is a point at which you say, I am no longer can look in the eyes of the people I'm really responsible for and to. And it's time for full-time political action. I can't spend 6 hours a day. And it's not just the 6 hours a day we spend in school, because if we're responsible for those kids, we're staying up late at night, we're making phone calls, we're taking, I mean, it consumes our lives, and we haven't got the time then to spend politically fighting it that we need to. So we got to figure that one out. We don't have all those lobbyists. And just one last thing on spin. I do think it's partly related to this fact that the people we're getting to lead our systems now, which include mayors and businessmen and so forth, I think have lived in a world of spin much longer than the old superintendents, whatever they were. They came up through the ranks, and they had no time they didn't go to business school. Harvard has courses for these new leaders, and half of those courses are on the business skill of selling something, not the skill of doing something, of looking good, not doing good.
I had to go to a hearing about a girl, a brilliant girl named Tara, who couldn't learn how to read, and she was quite far along in school. She really couldn't learn how to read, but she could remember every single thing that was read to her and talk about it pretty much like an adult. And she needed to go to a very expensive private school, and I was sent as the teacher witness, and I was asked ahead of time what I was going to say, and I said, she needs to go to a private school. We're not helping her learn how to read at all. She used to say, I really need to be taught with more phonemic awareness. I mean, this is a very unusual kid. And they said, but you work for the Department of Education. I guess then it was the Board of Education. You representing the Board of Education. I said, no. You don't really pay me enough. I represent what I'm thinking, and I'm going to tell you what I think. You asked me to come here. And so the bottom line is, when I cannot any longer, save 3 weeks of being silent on this budget, but when I can no longer say to teachers or kids what I really think, I won't do it anymore. And I've been very clear about that many times. And I have written many times to the Chancellor, and I have said, this can't be. This isn't the way it will be here. I won't do this. I can't do this. And I think at the same time, you live in the real world. You decide which are the things you will speak out about and when you won't. But there's no job that can ever be worth so much that you just mold yourself into whoever. And that speaks to the hope part. So I guess I have to know, I have to see those kids. They give me something to hope for every day. The teachers Marsha is here, and Molly and Vincent, and I walk, I could spend 5 minutes in any one of their rooms, and I will have something to hope for 3 weeks. And they're not alone, and it's in their interactions with the kids, which I wish I had many more of, and many fewer of with Kathleen Grimm and the like, that keeps me moving through this work. And some days it's one foot in front of the other.
And just when we'll all make slightly different decisions about when to be silent, when to speak up. And that's one of our dilemmas in this period, because that's how they pit us against each other. This one decides to take a stand here, this one here, and then this one says, you're selling out. We have to be careful, because it's easy for us in our vulnerability to lash out at each other now, because that's safe. And it's very important. This is a time we need to organize and forgive each other, and I think she's made the right decision here. But if someone might argue with her, that's part of the kind of movement I hope we build, and that we don't always remember when we build a movement that it's got to be big enough so we can have those arguments within our ranks without calling each other names when we differ.
You know, on Friday afternoon, when no one's there, or when the APs leave, close your door and do something with those kids. And you said they want you to take this furniture out, so you take it out, and then they go away, and then you bring it back in. Because you know that they're not gonna come back for a couple of weeks. But what if they're coming back in 5 minutes? And so using that 5 minutes as a metaphor, it wasn't that many years ago when they started this mandatory holdback of kids in New York City, that if I wanted to promote a kid, I just promoted them. I had a conference with the family, and we had a policy in the school, and I didn't care what the chancellor said, and this is only 5 years ago. Because I could go into the system and just promote the kid. What do they know? September, they thought the kid was going to be in the 3rd grade again. I said, no, the kid's in the 4th grade. Family knew, the kid knew, and that's the way it was. You can't do that now, because there's 5 minutes. They will be back in 5 minutes, because what Alyce is describing is they can go in and look at what's happening in classrooms. They can go in and look at her budget. They have control over it. They've used technology in new ways now. And so maybe the comment that I'm making is that the resistance, and I'm not criticizing anything. You have a courageous story there, Alyce, and I applaud you on it. Maybe we have to relook at what our resistance is. That resistance, in the face of more control, the super control that they have now, which they didn't have 5 years ago, maybe we have to start looking for either, I'll say dramatic or different ways to resist, rather than just putting the couch out for 5 minutes and then bringing it back in.
Well, they accidentally sometimes give you the floor, and then there you are in public. You can say whatever you want. So where we are, we do have this school choice, and every year I'm asked to go in to speak to a whole enormous room of parents to talk about what type of middle school child will thrive in your school. And I have colleagues who stand up there and will go on and on about how, a highly motivated and hardworking, well-organized student who can do 4 hours of homework every night will do just great in my school. And so this year I was like, I am going to go first. And when I go first, I'm going to say what I said last year. I'm going to say, I'm a public school principal. And I can't believe you're asking me that question, because isn't it my job to make the school that makes it work for your kids? Yeah, I think that school, that child that you're all describing or about to describe, and you there who are the head of enrollment and planning for New York City, isn't it your job to come up with an equitable system to distribute these kids? So when they give you the mic, take it.
We're trying to organize New York against their new great idea, and they always have this wonderful spin. They have this great idea on behalf of equity.
Right.
Oh, please.
We have a new and wonderful idea in that we should test all 4 and 5-year-old children with an IQ test on behalf of equity.
Yes. Didn't you
You
know?
wonder about that. Someone said, how does that serve equity? Well, you've just not got a creative mind. Because then we can pull those children who are in the top 5 percentile, the 95th up percentile, we can pull them out and send them to gifted programs, and
then they
on an equitable basis.
Right.
Because, and so we're going to test them all.
And then we'll have all that great baseline information on the 4 and 5-year-olds.
There's absolutely no question, since they've also, by the way, scaled back on the money for the gifted and talented, that this has nothing to do with gifted and talented. It is another vehicle for getting testing started at an earlier age. So then the testing will go on for kindergarten, first, second, to see who's gifted. But the information about these IQ scores will be available to every parent and every teacher and every school, and it'll be in that database. And you know what IQ scores were invented for. And the notion that the same system that's holding us accountable for high standards is going to put in the hands of every parent and teacher information that misleading, racist information about whether their child has high potential or not is just in the name of equity. But you know, once you put the spin on it, then we're sort of in the defensive. What we are trying to organize is, this is the idea, to find 60 schools, 10 schools in every borough, small and large elementary schools, who would inform the city and the press in May that there's no conditions in the world in which this school is going to be allowed to do that. Coming from the parents and from the on-site councils, that we are not going to do this in this building, and you might as well know it now. This is May, this is supposed to be done in the September. Come up with some other idea for equity, because this one isn't going to fly. And now, are we going to succeed? Well, we're getting statements written by prestigious people, some of who are awkward because they say I'm a prestigious academic. I agree with you 100%, but I don't get involved in politics. So I don't know if I want to sign your statement. Then we have some parents have written a statement, and they're going to go around to schools to try to find these 60 schools. Now, what we have to promise people is we're going to stick together, because if one school does it, that's one thing. We think it would be hard for them to say and be hard for the press if 60 schools announce it. Tune in next year, I'll tell you what happens.